Hi, I'm Trudy, and today on Shelf Esteem I want to talk about something that writers spend a lot of time thinking about. It's important to readers too, but readers usually don't pay as much attention to it. And what I'm talking about is point of view. Whose perspective is the story told from? Now, a writer has a number of choices when they're telling a story, and what point of view is a very important choice that writers sometimes go back and forth on. I know I myself have often switched points of view when I was telling a story, playing around with first or third person until I settle on what feels right for that story. One choice is first person, telling it as if it happened to me. And that's the obvious choice if it really did happen to you, like if you're writing a memoir or a blog post or a column or article about your own experience. But it's also a popular choice with fiction, where you create the fictional character and write from their point of view as if they were telling the story. Imagine I'm writing a scene where a woman meets a friend for coffee in a coffee shop. There's some tension in the air, but our main character is not sure why. In first person, the scene might look something like this. I sat at the table, waiting for Elaine to arrive. I was a little nervous, thinking about how cool and distant she had sounded on the phone. She entered and sat down, and I greeted her with a cheery,
Hi. Hi.
was all she said in return. She definitely sounded like something was wrong. I wanted to ask if she was angry at me, but I couldn't find the words, so we just sat in awkward silence. First-person point of view offers the intimacy of feeling like it's being told by the character directly to the reader, even if we know that what we're reading is fiction. A first-person narrator, whether real or fictional, becomes very close to the reader. Another less common option is second person. Now, if what you read is mostly sort of mainstream or genre fiction, you probably won't encounter second person narration very often, unless you're reading a how-to article or perhaps one of those choose-your-own-adventure books that used to be popular when some of us were young. But in literary fiction, authors sometimes play around with second-person narrative voice, as if they're inviting the reader to slip into the character's skin and imagine that the scene is happening to them. So that same coffee shop scene, rewritten in the second person, might sound like this. You sit at the table, waiting for a friend to arrive. Perhaps you feel a little nervous, thinking about how cool and distant she sounded on the phone when you last talked. When she enters, you greet her with a cheery,
Hi. Hi.
is all she gives you in return. She definitely sounds like something's wrong. You want to ask if she's angry at you, but you can't find the words, so you both just sit in awkward silence. Far more often than second person, you'll see third person limited. In third person limited, the author doesn't take on the character's voice as they do in first person. Instead, the author stands outside the story speaking as a narrator, but they're still showing us the action through the point of view of that one character, who is now described as he or she rather than I. Trudy sat at the table, waiting for Elaine to arrive. She was a little nervous, thinking about how cool and distant Elaine had sounded on the phone the last time they talked. When Elaine entered, Trudy greeted her with a cheery,
Hi. Hi.
was all she got in return. Elaine definitely sounded like something was wrong. Trudy wanted to ask if she was angry at her, but she couldn't find the words, so they both just sat there in awkward silence. Notice what all three of these versions of the scene have in common. Though choosing a different point of view changes the voice and feel of the scene slightly, we still have the same information in every one, because first, second, and third person limited are all limited points of view. We only see the perspective through that one character. We only know what she knows and what she thinks and feels. So in that scene, one character is nervous about why her friend is acting so distant, but she doesn't really have any more information, and a limited point of view doesn't give any more information than that. In a first person, second person, or third person limited point of view, we see the story the same way all of us experience our own lives, through one point of view, only knowing what that one person, in real life it's us, knows. We can't know the private thoughts of other people, and in a story with a limited point of view, you can't know the private thoughts of any other character other than your main viewpoint character. But there's another option for writers, and that's the omniscient point of view. And in the omniscient point of view, the author-narrator becomes much more like God, looking down on the whole scene from above and able to glimpse the thoughts of a number of different characters. So imagine how that coffee shop scene might look in an omniscient point of view. Trudy sat at the table, waiting for Elaine to arrive. She was a little nervous, thinking about how cool and distant Elaine had sounded on the phone the last time they talked. When Elaine entered, Trudy greeted her with a cheery,
Hi. Hi.
Elaine replied. She couldn't believe how casual Trudy was being about this whole thing, as if she had never said those horrible things behind Elaine's back. Simmering with resentment, Elaine sat down, letting the awkward silence between them grow longer. See the difference? The omniscient viewpoint shows us that Elaine is upset because of rumors that she thinks I've been spreading behind her back. In the omniscient viewpoint, we know what's bothering her, and we would also know whether or not I had actually said those things about her. So the omniscient viewpoint gives us much more information. It's not that one point of view is right or wrong. It's right or wrong for a particular writer, and sometimes for a particular reader as well. Some readers claim to have really strong preferences. Like I have heard people say, I won't read a book that's written in the first person. Seems strange to me, but that's your preference. Points of view also tend to go in and out of fashion. For example, the omniscient point of view was very, very common in the 19th century novel. As I said earlier, today using second-person point of view usually marks your novel out as being pretty clearly literary fiction. But in fact, regardless of fashion, most readers read books with a wide variety of points of view, and it's something that writers have to carefully consider. I know that I almost always write from a limited third-person point of view, but I tend to alternate that point of view in different chapters between different characters. So for example, in my novel That Forgetful Shore, I alternate points of view in alternating chapters between my two main characters, Triffy and Kit. One chapter telling Triffy's point of view, the other telling Kit's. But within the chapters, the point of view is always limited third person, and that's what works for me. This is a good opportunity to talk about something that writers are occasionally cautioned against, which is called head hopping. People use this term to mean, hopping around from the head of one character, the perspective of one character to another. Now, I think some people who give advice in writing misuse this term, because I think sometimes they apply it to an omniscient point of view. And in fact, when you're writing with an omniscient point of view, it's perfectly acceptable to hop from head to head. That's what you're doing, is getting into the thoughts of different characters. But you have to have established clearly and consistently throughout the story that you are writing in an omniscient point of view. Where I think the charge of head hopping is relevant is if you have been writing throughout in a limited point of view from one character's perspective, and suddenly and for no reason you jump into another character's point of view without establishing an omniscient perspective. If you've been writing in a limited point of view and you suddenly tell us what a different character is thinking, that's wrong, because within the parameters of that story, that's something we shouldn't know. So the key here really is to know what point of view you're writing in and to be consistent. That being said, of course, as with all rules of writing, there are people who break the rules and do it successfully. I'm thinking of examples like Jenny Lawson, the bloggist, in her memoir, Let's Pretend This Never Happened. As with all memoirs, it's mostly written in first person, but occasionally she drops into second person for long passages, even full chapters. And as you're reading, you've been reading her story in her voice, you understand that if she starts a chapter with, you wake up in the morning, you realize what she's really saying is, I wake up in the morning and this happens, but she's inviting us into her perspective through use of the second person. Another really interesting rule breaker that I read a while back was novelist Tiffany Baker. In her novel, The Little Giant of Aberdeen County, she uses a point of view that should be impossible, first-person omniscient. She has a first-person narrator, but that narrator tells us things that the first-person character couldn't possibly have seen or known or wasn't even present for. That's not a new thing, by the way. You get that kind of messing around with the rules going as far back as Lawrence Sterne in the novel Tristram Shandy, where the first-person character describes at length his own conception. But with writing, as with all art, the people who are able to break the rules successfully are usually the people who understand those rules and know them really, really well in the first place. So if you're a writer, you've probably already thought long and hard about choosing the right point of view for your story. If you're a reader, you may not even notice it, but choosing the right point of view is key to telling a good story, and that helps build everyone's shelf esteem.